Sarah Wright. I'm both the MS4 and the Land Disturbance Coordinator for Missouri Department of Natural Resources. And today we're going to go over some of the new changes with this new land disturbance permit. So we'll go ahead and get started on that. There's a lot to cover. Overall, the biggest changes were that it was reformatted for more of a logical progression, and more terms have been added to help make it more clear and specific. This does mean it is a longer permit if you're counting words or you're counting pages, but it was added for clarity. I do want to start off by reminding everybody that nothing in this presentation will replace reading the actual permit. There are parts of the permit I'm going to have in here that are just summarized, so they're not taken verbatim. So you still need to go read that permit even after watching this presentation. This presentation is not all encompassing. There's going to be a couple other changes in this renewal. They might have been just little smaller word changes or again reformatting, stuff like that I'm not going to cover in here. So please read the permit. So I'm going to start off by explaining the annoyance of the 5-year expiration. So no matter when you get your permit, you could have gotten it in January of 2021. And we're going to make you get that new one come February of 2022. So you really only had it for a year. And that is because of state statute that general permits are issued for a 5-year period. This is backed up with the requirements that go into these general permits. Behind the scenes, we are doing lots of drafting in public meetings, not even behind the scenes, I should say. There's industry reviews, there's reviews of those comments. A lot goes into this, and a lot did go into this renewal. We did start a year early on this one. And then we have the state regulation there that talks about why you have to have the permit in the first place, and that's based off of the federal regulations. So one thing I do want to point out about this is that there's a way to change this. You could get a site-specific land disturbance. We would write that for you, but it would be thousands of dollars. So kind of the benefit of this general permit is just you're paying probably closer to hundreds of dollars for it. So there's definitely cheaper to do this way. Another thing about our land disturbance permit here in the state is there's no annual fee. There's a single fee at the time you get the permit, and that's it. With other general permits even, there is an annual fee. So it is set up a little bit different. We're trying to save you money. Yes, it is annoying when those 5 years are up, but think of it this way. If you're getting one today, it's good for the next 5 years. So you get a full 5 years on it. So starting at the top of this new permit, the first thing that I really wanted to clarify was the very confusing common plan of development issue. So there is a nice chart towards the top of it. Lots of comments went into this to try to make it clearer. Does this solve all the problems, and is it still confusing? Absolutely. But hopefully this will help a little bit, and if not, you can always contact me. We can try to work through it. The second thing we really wanted to do was define who the primary operators are at that site. And this is kind of reflected from the EPA's construction general permit that they just put out. And it's the idea that on a site, there's going to be lots of people. It's hard to kind of tell who's who. So this is listing out who those primary contractors are. This isn't going to be, every single person on site that might be grading the land or installing the plumbing later in a project, but this is going to be those primary general contractors, project managers. Those roles do need to be listed out. Those names need to be listed out on this one. There's also been clarity added to support activity. So this is going to be that equipment staging or material storage areas. It's mostly seen in your borrow areas or the idea of having maybe a concrete batch plant on site. Things about this that's been laid out is that these need to be directly related to that construction site. So if you have a batch plant on site, you cannot be making some sort of, concrete for the guy down the street on a whole different project. This needs to be directly related to that project that is permitted there. And this is also stormwater discharges only. So again, if you have that batch plant, you cannot do any of the rinsing, letting any process water off site, I should say. So concrete does create process water. You either need to pump and haul that or dispose it properly. So another new addition is language for contaminated soils. This one was a suggestion from our industrial unit in the department because we really don't have an idea of how many contaminated soils are being disturbed in Missouri land disturbance under this permit. So there's really nothing else required except you need to notify the department, me, before you start. And so far, we've actually already had two. I believe both of those were tied to an underground storage tank removal. So it already had a plan it was working on to deal with that, and it was fine. I'm just kind of tracking it right now to see if it's something we need to include in further permits, or is it really not worth it. So not a big deal, but it is in there now. This one will affect, this one could affect you all. So there are no outstanding national resource waters here in the central Missouri, but there are some outstanding state resource waters, and I would need to check the TMDL and 305 list for impaired waters. And these are only for impaired waters with an impairment explicitly for sediment. So it's really not that many, but they do exist in the state. And those are just going to get a couple more protections. So these special streams, as we call them, in the impaired waters, they're just going to have more protections to make sure there's no degradation of the water quality. So you just need to be 1,000 feet or more away from that actual water body, and that's just going to be that stream reach that you're working with there. And these are going to be, if you are going to discharge to the site, we actually are going to need you to operate as no discharge if you're closer than 1,000 feet. So again, we can help you work through this if you guys do have a site where this might be happening. So another addition, this came from the floods, was emergency related projects. We had a lot of people trying to build levees or repair levees, and they technically needed a permit, and it was like almost embarrassing that we were trying to ask for them to get us a permit before they could begin work. So we closed that loophole, and now they can begin work. So if you have a repair to make due to, or this could be even tornadoes, due to a state, it has to be a declared state of emergency, you may begin work prior to having a permit, but you still do need to get that permit within 7 calendar days. We also put in some clarifications for the rainfall data. What happened during the previous cycle, we only had mentioned the NOAA Atlas 14 map, which is, very well recognized map for figuring out what your 2-year 24-hour storm event is going to be. Well, the map went down and it got really crazy out there. So we have actually added a second map now to the fact sheet as permanent choice. So this might be people who don't really want to get on the internet again and try to figure out what it is. They can just go to the back and they can find their value. It's going to be the conservative default value for the state. It is a little more stringent than the Atlas 14, so plan accordingly on that one. Okay, this was kind of in the previous permit. Track out was mentioned under roadways in the previous permit. So this time we're actually calling a spade, and track out is listed out that you need to minimize it from your site and onto the roadways. There are a little more listings of BMPs of possible things to do, such as designated exit points and stabilization. You can see the rumble strip on there. And it just kind of clarifies that this is important. You need to try to minimize this. It also clarifies when to remove it from the roadways, because it's going to happen. It's a matter of getting it off. So, and it also added clarity for those stormwater inlets, that sometimes these are going to be away from the active areas. We've seen land disturbance sites do a really good job of blocking off inlets that are in that actual active area. But when you have track out moving that sediment, you might need to look at some other storm drains to make sure you're protecting the water downstream. So now we also have added concrete washout. This one really wasn't mentioned at all in the previous permits, and it happens, so it's best just to put in there how to handle it. And honestly, most of the sites that we did see out there on the last permit cycle and those previous, they were handling concrete washout properly, but now it is in the permit with the requirements for how to contain it, And that could just be a little earthen pit. Doesn't have to be anything fancy there. Keep it away from water and inlets and stormwater conveyances. Make sure it's clean. You don't want these things overtopping. You don't want a truck pulling up full and there's nowhere to go. So you got to clean it out or make a new one. And there's no reason to hide these, so you put them on a map. You use visible signage. You make sure people know where that is so they can use it when they need to. So in the SWIP section, just a couple little changes on this one. We did clarify that electronic version is allowed. It was becoming very common practice, so it's in there. It's not even a question anymore to go ahead and do that. And again, there comes the part with the primary operators and the people responsible for the environmental, the sediment, and erosion control. These are just important things for us when we come out there to inspect to see. But, on site, it's good to know who's actually in charge and who's in charge of those environmental pieces. So one big addition to the site inspections is to do visual outfall inspections when stormwater is being discharged. Now this hopefully doesn't sound too scary, but this really is just taking note of the characteristics of that stormwater that's coming off of there during inspections. You're not going to have to get down there with any kind of meters and do anything fancy. It's really looking at turbidity. It's looking at like, oh yeah, it looks a little red. I think we're getting some clay in that water. Oh, there's foam. Why is there foam? There's oil. Hopefully it's just going to be like, no, it looks fine. It looks clean as we're going to get it. So, but it's still a matter of actually looking at it because this is a point source discharge permit, and those outfalls, that is that point source, and it's important to look at those when they're discharging. So that has been added to the site inspections. The frequency didn't really change, it just kind of got clarified a little bit better. And it really clarified that you can wait till the end of that rain event to go out there. There's no point in going in the middle of a rainstorm. I mean, go ahead and do it, but once it's over, then you can really go out there and see, did something happen? Is there something to repair? And we added language for non-work days, such as weekends or holidays, because no one needs to be out there on Christmas looking at that. So this we're bringing back the special streams and impairments part again. There is going to be a little bit increased need for inspections if you have those types of streams that you're discharging to or in the watersheds of. We did explicitly list in there that stabilized areas can go to monthly, and that frozen conditions may be temporarily reduced to monthly. And we definitely added language for basin dewatering. This was a thing, we had comments all over the state from our regional inspectors on this one. So if you have one of those large basins, you are dewatering it, you need to go out there every day to inspect that discharge if it's discharging. So then we did some clarification on the inspection reports. Again, you can have electronic logs. There is a new addition of time for inspections because rainfall doesn't clock in at 6 and clock out at 3. So you need to put the time that you did those inspections on there. And again, because you're looking at the outfall, when it's discharging, you should also look at it when it's not. Again, just to make an observation like, oh, everything looks fine, or why is there sediment in the creek now? So nothing too out of this world on that. Some BMP requirements were added. We did add some language for stockpile management, so that may not affect every site. We added language just promoting the use of sequential BMP, so that treatment train. There was a lot of our more serious like home builders and developers, we will see this a lot. This is standard practice, but because this is a general permit and because it goes out to anyone in the public, putting more explicit explanation of things such as a treatment train of BMPs, we found that to be necessary in there. And we added language for protective barrier when you have trees designated for preservation. I'm going to talk a little bit about stream buffers here. This did not change, like none of this changed, but hopefully there's a little bit of clarity in this. So the top part is from the permit there, and it's, talking about when you need to have that a buffer for surface waters. What apparently gets a little confusing out there is the idea of waters of the state. So below that is the actual, from state statutes, that's the definition of waters of the state. The main takeaway on this when you're looking at your surface waters is, does that water body cross the boundary property lines? Is it on one property? If it's like a lake and it is seriously on one, it's probably not waters of the state. But if you see a stream, is it actually leaving that property? Then it's probably waters of the state. Um, the DNR website does have a water quality standards map, and on there you can put on a layer for classified streams. But I will warn you, this does not mean it's all waters of the state. We just don't have them mapped yet, but it will give you maybe a better clue of if it's waters of the state or not. When in doubt, go ahead and give me a call, give someone in the department a call, and we'll see how we can help you with that one. But to go on with the stream buffers, so it's the same kind of 3-step down of, you want to have that 50-foot undisturbed. Or, and this is where you can have that supplemental, the BMPs, the sediment and erosion controls, that would give that equivalent to a 50-foot. And of course, there's always times when it's just absolutely infeasible, but those need to be kind of explained and shown in real life. You know, if we have an inspector walk out there and you have a big flat surface with a stream going through it, but you said it was impossible to leave it, we might question that a little bit. There needs to be a reason, like property lines, something needs to be going on why that was an infeasible thing. And we do have the exemptions from that too, exceptions from that. So that again is if no stormwater is being actually discharged to waters of the state from that site, or what we see a lot in the more urban areas is going to be that when it's pre-existing development had already happened. So maybe you're doing a redevelopment type of project and they already destroyed it. Well, we obviously cannot make you go back in time. So that is definitely going to be something that we take into consideration on that. So, and here again is that basin dewatering that we talked about earlier. So again, a lot of times when we see these on site, they are, the final plan for these is to be maybe a detention or a retention pond on site. But during the construction activities, it makes the most sense to use it as a sediment basin. And that's great. That's fine. That absolutely makes the most sense. So what we need to watch here is the dewatering that happens, because eventually those get to be too full and you need to get some of that clean water off the top of it. So this is just putting in there more points of what you need to do, more explicit BMPs that you need to do, such as no more throwing a hose and letting it sink to the bottom. Again, most of you all are probably already doing this, but we have to put these things in there in case somebody does not know to do that. You can see the picture on the right there is actually a really good picture of a nice treatment train of BMPs that they had up to make sure that when they dewatered, there's a basin off to the right, a very large one, that everything went okay. And that's why it goes back to that, also that last thing of inspecting when you are dewatering. There's no more just throwing it in and walking away and hoping for the best. That there has to be an actual inspection to make sure what's coming out of the end of that hose, or that the bag is still attached, that everything is going correctly when you're doing those activities. And language was added for frozen conditions, because there definitely are going to be those times when it's frozen. You don't need to go out there. So the inspections that I mentioned were definitely reduced, but this is not considered final stabilization. This is just a temporary hold on those. So it's all about planning ahead when it comes to winter coming. It always comes here in Missouri, so plan ahead, or else you're going to have a lot of BMPs holding that back all winter long. So we have a little bigger section on permit termination, and it explicitly lists out, besides the stabilization, you need to have the vegetation or permanent stabilization that you need to have. We also talk about removing all of your waste and equipment, including all temporary BMPs. No more sediment vents lasting for years. Those need to go. And a nice reminder here, that until you terminate that permit, you're going to need to keep complying with those permit conditions. So that includes having your public notification sign up, doing your inspections. So when it is stabilized, when you are done, go ahead and close that permit out. The one little caveat to that is if you are still have a permit open from the previous permit cycle, the one that expired in February, we are going to do a mass termination on those. So any of those that are left open, you do not need to get, you don't need to terminate those. So that's your one little get out of jail free card. And for the first time, we are actually allowing transfers and modifications to the land disturbance permit. This has not been done before, and we really don't know how it's going to go. So on those, you can do a transfer of ownership or change in name of facility, change of contact information. So there's going to be a form that you need to fill out there on the website, and there's going to be a modification fee of $100 to be submitted with that. If you're not sure if it's a real modification or not, just contact me. I'm the one handling all of these unless it gets crazy, and then we'll pull in the regional offices. But let me know. I can get you definitely the right stuff. But hopefully that's going to help people out from our previous method, which was somebody needs to get a new permit and then we terminate one. And so hopefully this will solve some headaches down the line. And in the back of the permit, as usual, we have our fact sheet. We do have a sign, again, as always. If you're a big stickler for details, you will notice it's got a different logo on it. So that is our updated version. There are definitions in the fact sheet. I think there's more than the previous permit. And of course, that new rainfall map. And this is all still being done on e-permitting. There were a lot of changes between the last time and now. Hopefully people are getting in there a little bit better. We put a couple enhancements behind the scenes. So there is a hotline phone number. You can call me, but I'm not that great at it. So you're better off calling the hotline. And we do have an email address too. We can a lot of times walk people through stuff via email as well. So do not hesitate to reach out on either of those as you're going through the permitting process. So with that, do you have any questions?
Yeah, and if anybody wants to actually vocalize their questions, I can. Okay, I'll unmute you real quick. Hopefully this will be smooth. All right, you should be able to turn on your.
All right, can you hear me?
Yes.
So this question kind of came up, and it was actually with discussion with the Boone County here, and with Nikki. I believe she's on. I think I saw her name pop up on here, but it had to do with regards to a developer developing a subdivision, and he's maintaining the land disturbance permit. And then after he closes the land disturbance permit, a builder purchases, let's say, 4 or 5 lots, and then he starts to develop each individual home site. Not to say that they would be attached; it could be 4 random lots, whatever it might be. It was kind of brought up that she thought that with the way one of the things that this permit would do is require that home builder to purchase a land disturbance permit for the building of those houses.
Yes, it sounds like it. It sounds like that falls under what we call common plan of development or common promotional plan. And that is when there is a larger common plan of development or sale, and that cumulative disturbance is going to be more than 1 acre, then it needs to have a permit.
So let's say there are 1/4 acre lots and they have 3 lots. Then it would not need.
If the disturbed area is less than 1 acre, and that's the key, disturbed area, and then if it's less than 1 acre, then no, they wouldn't, and that's only for the state permit. So
what if there's 2 1/4 acre lots on one side of the street, and down the road there's 2 1/4 acre lots down on the other side of the street, and they decide to build them all at the same time. So they're disturbing half an acre,
Mhm.
down the road and half an acre down the other road.
Sure, if that falls into that, if it's all for one subdivision, that makes it a common plan, and they would need a permit for that. If it was half and half, that makes it a full acre. So yes.
So what if they were like a lot of times these builders, they'll buy, maybe they'll intend to buy more lots as they go on, but they're selling these lots as it's completed and they never actually have a full acre disturbed at one time.
So that's the key is if it's under an acre, well, it's going to depend. That's kind of a trick question because if I'm thinking of a subdivision, and like you said, let's say the original person sold it off, how many other things are happening in that subdivision? If there's more than one home builder, unfortunately, because they're in that same common plan, that adds to that cumulative acreage. So even if home builder A is only disturbing half an acre at a time, if home builder B already has 1 acre disturbed, then that other guy, that first guy, is still going to have to get a permit. So it's all about that cumulative for that whole entire contiguous area. So that's
So if it's like
subdivisions
a
with.
300 lot subdivision and they've
Mhm.
sold 20, so how do you keep track of who gets one, who doesn't?
That is where it gets. I have been involved in those, driving around with a plat map and marking off. The keys to look for is the cumulative acreage on this. So like I said, it can be multiple builders that have disturbed that over 1 acre thing. The other thing to think about is who's the final buyer, and that's where it gets really tricky for us. If you are developing it, if you are a home builder, but you are not that final buyer, you are going to sell it once it's built, then you need that permit. However, let's say Michelle wants to move in there, she hires a contractor, they are building on a lot she owns for her home, and it's less than an acre, she's actually exempt. So it does exempt that final private buyer.
So, okay.
And
Okay.
going off of going off that, I have a question kind of too as well. Sorry, Keenan, we can keep going too with you as well. But so if the builder knows that they are going to be selling it to me at the end of the day or the end of the year, whenever it's done, but then it's still in their name, they still have to get a land disturbance permit. Is that correct?
Yes,
Even
it
though
is.
we have an agreement, I picked out the paint color and
Right.
all of that.
Right.
Okay.
Now, yeah, once you pay them, even though they're the ones working, because I don't expect you to go out there with a hammer and try to figure out how to build a house. We'll let the professionals do that. But once there's that agreement made or papers are signed, money has exchanged, and you are the actual owner, then it's no longer for sale. But as long as it's for sale, it does need a permit.
Okay.
So, in a lot of those larger subdivisions, the developer might build some homes or they might be, I guess, still maintaining, the sediment ponds and stuff because typically those BMPs aren't installed until there's a build out.
Yep.
Is there a way that he's able to provide that maintenance and maintain that permit for the other builders, or how's that work out?
That can happen. That would be a really tight agreement if I were that first developer. If I were the first developer, I would keep the permit open for the parts I am actually responsible for. So like you said, maybe the basin, maybe a road here, and that's it. You can, if that developer feels comfortable with like maintaining permit coverage, but ultimately, if they have one bad home builder and sediment erosion's going up, just big old mess, the permit holder is ultimately responsible. So, um, my biggest advice would be build a lot and get that thing stabilized. Put down sod and call it a day. The quicker it's stabilized, the quicker you can get it off of the permit.
Wow, this is going to be interesting.
This is not new. This has been in both federal and state regulations since 1990. It's just been very ignored and confusing, and we started working on it last permit cycle, and it's just getting a little bit more explicit every year. So EPA's got their eye on it, so we got our eye on it too. We're trying to get it out there.
Gotcha. Okay.
Thanks, Keenan. From the city of Columbia, did you guys raise your hand? I saw a hand go up, but it was gone by the time I raised it. But I see a question in the chat, so if it wasn't you, let me know. But do you see this? I can
Yep.
read aloud too, Sarah.
Yeah.
In
Yeah.
regards to the monthly inspection during the winter freezing months, how is this determined, and what is the average temperature?
Sure. So we are really just going with we're gonna trust you guys. If you say it was frozen, it's probably pretty widespread knowledge that it's been cold. If someone tells me they had frozen land this past week, I'm gonna probably be like, I don't think you did. So we're not gonna ask you to prove it. If you want to pop a picture in your SWIP, that probably wouldn't hurt, but um, we are not asking for any kind of proof or determinations on that.
Is there any other questions that we can? So I have one about the state outstanding state resource waters. So is it in the whole watershed as a whole building in it? Is that correct, or?
So, yeah, that one is for, so again, you guys are with the state resource waters, and that's going to be, you just need to be 1,000 feet away. So it's watershed wide with the national riverways, but for
Okay.
state, yeah, so for state, it's only going to be that 1,000 feet away. So, which most of the time that's going to probably be just fine because those waters tend to be closer to state parks and stuff like that. So usually they're pretty close to public land as it is. So.
All right. Well, thank you, Sarah. I really appreciate you kind of helping dig
Of
into
course.
the new permit. Again, if you guys, I'll be sending out, this will be recorded. If you want to share it with anybody else, you're welcome to. But if you guys are wanting those professional development hours, I know a couple people are joining as a group. And so I'll send that out and just email me back and be like, these are the people who attended from our group as well. All right. Well, I'll give it the last couple seconds in case there's any developing questions. And Sarah, is it okay if I go ahead and send out your email, my follow-up email to everybody else? So if they have anything that comes up later,
Yep.
I'll email you
Absolutely.
directly.
Yep,
All
absolutely. No
right.
problem there.
Great, great. Well, thank you very much. And thanks everyone for attending. Enjoy your lunch.
Awesome.